Trevor, we're going to put everything into a stew and then try to come out with some actionable conclusion there. And I hear what Eamon was saying about the New York Times story. I read it, and I talked to a couple of my friends who'd all read it as well. And I mean this with all due respect. It was a lot of journalism, a lot of hard work, and some fantastic reporting. Do you think the story is going to change if there is any undecided voters out there? I'm not sure how there is, but if there are any undecided voters, is the story that kind of is filled with stuff we already suspected going to move the needle at all?
Well, thanks for having me, Brian. I don't think this story is going to do a ton in terms of making waves in the campaign. The one thing that I would say, though, is that we're 5 weeks out from Election Day tomorrow, which doesn't leave a lot of time for the needle to move in any direction. And if you're trailing, and I think it's fair to say right now that the polls favor the challenger, former Vice President Biden, against President Trump, you don't love to see any day wasted on a story that doesn't benefit your candidate. And so if you're President Trump's campaign, no, I'm not necessarily sure that you're concerned that independents or undecideds are really going to be swayed one way or the other about this, but you're going to lose the news cycle for a day or two. And when we've only got 36 days until Election Day, that's not a great thing.
Yeah, I just don't know if the news cycle, as we used to reference it, Trevor, matters right now, just because there's just such a large split there between the voters. I want to ask you this. You referenced the polls, and obviously we knew that in 2016, Hillary Clinton was ahead by 4 to 8% in the swing states heading into election night. We know obviously what happened. Are the polls worthwhile at all?
Yeah, I think they're certainly worth watching. And I think for a Wall Street audience, it's worth remembering that polling is really about modeling. We think a lot about the inputs that go into polling in terms of the calls that get made, the surveys that get taken. But really all that data goes into a series of models that are proprietary to each polling service. And so, I think it's really important to remind people that, for a Wall Street analyst, you would never let your model stay stale and inaccurate. And I think that polls and pollsters have, done a lot of work over the last 4 years to understand where they went wrong in 2016 and try and correct that to a degree that they can. Now, when you put junk data into a poll or into a model, you get junk answers out. And if there's really a consistent effort on the part of Trump supporters to underplay that support, then you could certainly see another round of outperformance by President Trump on Election Day. But I think that it is worth remembering that pollsters are working to improve this data all the time, improve the models all the time, and you can expect them to generate better results, cycle to cycle when you're dealing with phenomena like the Trump campaign.
Okay, so maybe a little bit more accurate, because obviously 2016 was just not a good look for a lot of pollsters. I mean, I can tell you this much, Trevor. I drove back and forth through Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio because, of course, nothing else to do, just drive around every weekend, right? And I could tell you the eyeball test, for what it's worth, and maybe it's worth nothing, in Wisconsin, probably the most important state, a lot of Trump signs, a lot of Trump bumper stickers as well. It seemed a lot more sort of in your face than I remember back in 2016. Mm-hmm. What do you make of this concept of the shy or the hidden Trump voter? How much do you think that might come into play, or do you really believe that the president, unlike 2016, is in serious trouble?
So I think there's certainly more vocal support, more advertised support for President Trump in 2020 than there is in 2016. I do think that at this point you have to give the nod in terms of who's the favorite right now to Vice President Biden. I think polls are really a snapshot in time. Things can change in the last 5 weeks of the race. But for now, I think you have to believe that President Trump is the underdog here and that he's going to have to move the needle between now and Election Day in order to win that out. Now, there are a lot of really close polls in a lot of really important swing states. You're going to be looking at Wisconsin. You're going to be looking at Florida. You're going to be looking at Pennsylvania. You're going to be looking at North Carolina, Arizona. There's a wide playing field here, and there's a lot of wood to chop for the campaigns between now and Election Day. But right now, I think you'd probably rather be in the former vice president's camp, in that seat than you would the incumbent.
Very quickly, Trevor, before we let you go, I want to ask you this, a little bit sensitive here. Dianne Feinstein of California going after Supreme Court nominee Amy Coney Barrett, largely on her faith. Catholics make up 1 out of every 5 Americans in this country. About 22% of the country identifies as having some or all Catholic faith. Do you believe that this is a sort of a risk, this entanglement of religion and the Supreme Court could be a risk for the Democrats and maybe kind of a hit to Biden, only because, to your point at the beginning, it steals the headlines?
Sure. So there's a pretty famous, interaction between Senator Feinstein and Judge Amy Coney Barrett when she was being confirmed for her federal court seat. And I think that Democrats have probably learned an important lesson around not making this about faith per se. I think Democrats are going to point to the fact that there are already 5 Catholics on the Supreme Court, and they're going to point to the fact that their candidate for president, Joe Biden, is a Catholic. And so I think they're less likely to fall into that trap this time around than they were the last time.